Welcome to Sikhcast, brought to you by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.
Introducing Paigham-i-Goya, Expression of Love, new translations of a selection of ghazals from Bhai Nand Lal Goya. Today's podcast begins with the recitation of Bhai Nand Lal's ghazal in Persian, followed by a new English transcreation, the result of a unique collaboration between Dr. Fatima Fayyaz and Dr. Nadhra Khan of Lahore University of Management Sciences, Damanpreet Singh, writer and graduate student, and Inni Kaur of SikhRI, followed by a discussion between Daman and Inni about the beauty of the ghazal and the transcreation process.
بدر در پیش رخت شرمنده است، بلکه خورشید جهان هم بنده است. چشم ما هرگز به غیر از حق ندید، ای خوشا چشمی که حق بیننده است. ما نمی لافیم از زهد و ریا، گر گنهکاریم حق بخشنده است. دیگری را از کجا آریم ما، شور در عالم یکی افکنده است. حرف غیر از حق نیاید هیچگاه، بر لب گویا که حق بخشنده است.
Before your face, even the full moon is embarrassed. Rather, the sun of the universe too is a slave. Our eyes witness nothing but the truth divine. Oh, fortunate is the eye that beholds the divine. Neither do we flaunt piety, nor do we indulge in hypocrisy. If we are sinners, the divine is the forgiver. From where would we bring another? The world reverberates with echoes of oneness. Nothing is ever uttered except truth divine by the lips of Goya, as the divine is the forgiver.
Guru Fateh Ji, this is Inni Kaur in conversation with Damanpreet Singh on Ghazal number 8 from Bhai Nand Lal's collection, Divan-i-Goya. Welcome, Daman. I am so looking forward to our conversation today. But Daman, before we begin talking about the Ghazal, I want to share a passage. Actually, I want to read a passage that I came across and thought it would be interesting to share this with our listeners. And I'd love to hear your take on this as well. So here we go. Perhaps the most significant challenge of translating classical Persian poetry is the density of meaning in the original. Drawing on the vocabulary of Sufism, the traditions of ancient Persia, the imagery of Arabic literature, classical Persian poetry developed a distinctive style very early in its history. This idiom's most important features are the diversity of meanings, layers of references, and a persuasive symbolism understandable only to the initiated. Daman, the understandable only to the initiated. What do you make of that?
Yeah, this is great because I think that for listeners who haven't listened to the previous episodes, we talked in the discussion on Ghazal 2 about how scholars have argued that Bhai Nand Lal was really appropriating this very complicated and, a poetry style with a very, very long history and was speaking back to people who would have known this literature. That's like what the mainstream scholarship has been suggesting, that it was very much him writing to the initiated, insofar as he was trying to make an argument to people who would have been immersed in, Sufism or the traditions of ancient Persia, as this person is putting it. And what's really interesting, I think, from the contemporary point of view and from a Sikh point of view, is that there is no sense really of an initiated, right? Like, I think it is a very Sikh point of view to think, everything is accessible to anyone as long as you have the time and you put in the work and it's there for you. The text reveals itself to you in its meanings. So that I think is something that we've been trying to do through these discussions. The team that's working on these ghazals, as we've talked about in the past, has a wide range of expertise. We have Fatima, who is a scholar of Persian literature, so she knows the symbolism and the traditions of ancient Persia, etc. We have Nadhra, who is an art historian and has a deep background in South Asian history. And then there's also the Sikh angle and the specifics of his references to Gurbani and so forth. So it's interesting because I think through Bhai Nand Lal's ghazals, we might have another sense of the initiated, and I think that sense might just be anyone who has the time and patience to think with him and to feel with him can understand what he's saying. If you're willing to do a little bit of research, you're willing to think a little bit closely with each word and each line, as we've tried to do over the past year, you are able to understand what he's getting at. So it is interesting because it is, of course, we've dealt with this in previous episodes, but he is taking a classical form that has rules and expectations and has a particular form and playing with it and also showing his mastery of it. So I think in these discussions, we're trying to demonstrate both of those things.
You made excellent points, Daman. But for me, it is, when I read only to the initiated, I would probably have added only to the seeker, because it's the seeker who then delves into and goes through and finds everything and wants to know what is being said, because the intensity for that longing and that journey is so high. So I want to begin with the first couplet, Daman, and let me just read those two lines and then we'll talk about it, because I found a great deal of symbolism in there, and I want to speak about that symbolism, what it means, because unless we don't understand that, we truly cannot appreciate these two lines. So, before your face, the full moon is embarrassed. Rather, the sun of the universe too is a slave. So in the classical poetry, Persian poetry, moon, chand, that metaphor is extraordinary. It somehow, manages to encompass every idea, every emotion, feeling, longing, desire, passion, love, even scorn, heartache, pain that lights up in the eyes of the beholder. The moon is never that cold fire that consumes its lover from within. It is the moon that soothes us. We speak to it. It is there, for a lover, for a seeker. The moon has that emphasis. And it's a she. It's always referred to as she in Persian poetry. Interestingly, in Persian literature, the sun is the male, and the sun is idealized as that life giving force. It is that universal symbol of cosmic power and is associated with the ancient Iranian god of light. So here we have two very powerful symbols. And we are saying, but before these two powerful things, your face is, they are embarrassed. So what must be that face?
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for bringing that in, because I think that is really important for, again, understanding the full meaning of the images he's drawing on. And of course, I think at another level, this is a theme we've seen in his ghazals, where he is drawing on this classical imagery for the beloved to refer to his connection to the Guru. and is constantly, the classic image is, of course, that, like, even in the face of all the breadth of the universe, it's you, and it's only your face. Yeah, we're once again seeing how he's invoking the breadth of the universe, the magic of the full moon, right? The force of the sun to convey his love for the beloved in a really intimate and powerful, but also vast way.
And he says it right in the beginning.
Mhm.
He begins with that. And this is what I love about poetry. It's one of the most beautiful and refined verbal expression that human beings in all cultures use. And it carries such images and meanings. And, for those who walk on that spiritual path, they seek a more profound sense inside poetry because there are multiple layers. It's veiled.
Mhm.
As you can see from these two lines, there are multiple dimensions to like every two verses, every verse. And as the seeker ripens, as their understanding ripens, and the deeper the relationship, they find greater depth in it.
Mhm.
And at the end of the day, Daman, every kind of love or any kind of love that we experience in our lives eventually points to divine love
Mhm.
because that love is so pure in this. Not, I don't want to use. It's so giving. It is so vast that that's what it is. So I come to the second couplet. Our eyes witness nothing but the truth divine. Oh, fortunate is the eye that beholds the divine. And it's interesting, Daman, because we use the word, because we've translated the word hak for truth divine. And when I read it in Persian, it was immediately when I heard the word hak, my mind went to Mansur.
Mhm.
And, when he said, Ana hak, I am the truth, which was, he was hung for it,
Mhm.
right? Because how dare you call yourself God?
Mhm.
That was the understanding and very much the pronouncement. But he was probably, I don't know what he was thinking, but it is when when you rise above your ego
Mhm.
and are experiencing something so great that you have experienced the truth,
Mhm.
that hug, that place. And then, of course, we know the story. He was hung for it.
Mhm.
Um, what are your thoughts about this word?
Yeah. So this is a new word as far as the ghazals we've discussed so far and the various forms in which Bhai Nand Lal has referred to the divine. Of course, in the previous, we've seen Bhai Nand Lal refer to the divine as his beloved.
Hmm.
And now we're seeing, so there's, I think, a couple of things that are kind of interesting here. The first being that in this ghazal, looking at this ghazal as a whole, we don't, the first couplet refers directly to you, to the Guru, or to the divine.
Hmm.
Then we switch to Haq, and now in the remaining couplets, we'll see the divine referred to as Haq. And as you noted, Haq in Persian means truth. In this context, it's specifically kind of the ultimate truth. That was a translation we played with in our conversations. Truth with the capital T,
Hmm.
really settled on truth hyphen divine to demonstrate that this Haq is actually pointing to an attribute of the divine and is being used not simply to mean divine for all of its meanings, but specifically the capital T truth that forms part of one force, forms part of however we want to refer to the Guru, divine, etc. So I guess there's two things that are kind of interesting. One is that there is a reference to Mansur, as you're pointing out, Inni,
Hmm.
that will actually come up again. So in the next podcast, we'll talk about that more at length because he actually invokes Mansur. So he's
Hmm.
directly referring to this story. This is, again, one of those moments where we can imagine who his audience would have been, because he is engaging something that would have been in their vernacular and in their understanding. And then the other thing is that we, I think, are getting a sense by this ghazal of the various ways in which he will describe his relationship to the divine. You know, we've seen him talk very powerfully about eyes before. In the previous, it was the eyes that shed pearls or tears. And it's the eye that's witnessing, or the eye that's beholding the truth divine or the divine. So I think that was another part of this that is very powerful, is that we're beginning to understand some of the ways in which he's going to conceive of, or that he experiences, his relationship to the divine.
You know, when I look, oh, fortunate is the eye that beholds the divine. And if I just say it in simple Punjabi, खुशकिस्मत हैगी आ ओ अख, yeah, you know, जो तुहानू देख सकदी, who can recognize your beauty, who can recognize your divinity. Khushkismat. So I love that word, khushkismat. And that's why fortunate and khushkismat looked, sounded. I don't know if fortunate has that word of khushkismat in it.
Yeah, and this was also a conversation that we had during as we were doing the translation with Fatima and Nadhra, because in Persian it's khush, which if we were to translate, like you're saying, if we were translating that in kind of everyday speech, we would maybe say happy. So that is a question, right? Because it would be maybe slightly different to say, oh, happy is the eye that beholds the divine. If you're happy, I suppose you're also fortunate, but that maybe takes us in another direction, right? That is our interpretation as
right.
Four of us. So that is something that readers and listeners might, take issue with, and that would be fine. But yeah, I think and then here we also see kind of the way in which and I think this is a theme that will develop throughout this ghazal, so maybe we want to talk about it more with other couplets, but there is a way in which he is kind of trying to, so I guess I should talk about just from my own perspective, but I'm beginning to see the many, many different ways in which he relates to the divine. And, we had that great line in the previous where he was saying, sometimes Zahid, sometimes Sufi.
Yes.
There's a way in which there's many colors to the way in which he experiences the divine. And here it's the eye witnessing truth rather than him looking at the angel-faced beloved, right? Where we have a physical description, and here we're abstracted and we're thinking about capital T truth. So, how to think about that complexity, I think, is another interesting question.
So we move on to couplet number 3. Neither do we flaunt piety, nor do we indulge in hypocrisy. If we are sinners, the divine is the forgiver. So Daman, what do you think Goya is stating here? Does it read as if he is highly confident of his relationship? Because to say, I know I'm a sinner, but I know you're the forgiver. So there, I've just laid it out.
Yeah, this was an interesting line because I think it really was quite difficult to translate, because it's not entirely clear, even in the original Persian, what he's trying to say. So maybe we can go through, like, for example, the first line, neither do we flaunt piety, nor do we indulge in hypocrisy. If we take some time to look at the specifics of that line in the original Persian. So the first thing is that zud or rea, which is how we've translated piety and hypocrisy respectively, were quite difficult to translate because we have, and again, this is where it comes in, where there's multiple references with each word that one could think about forever, right? But we have the word zud, which generally means piety or devotion, was another way in which we translated it. So that one was relatively straightforward. But then rea either means devotion, or it can also mean hypocrisy, which on the face of it are two different things.
Mm-hmm.
And as Fatima explained to us in a line from Rumi, he has this formulation of Zodorea together, and he's using it to refer to both piety and devotion, right? They're both kind of positive things, and they're kind of positive ways in which one might associate with the divine. And then she explained to us that in a line from Hafiz, we actually get the same formulation, but in his line, he's using these words to critique kind of religious people or pious people who actually are, he has a line that I'm not going to translate it exactly, but, we could go back to the original. But there's a line in the Persian where he kind of is saying that the fire of Zodorea, the fire of piety, kind of destroys one's actual devotion to the divine, right? So this kind of hypocritical piety or this like performative piety that putting on as a show for the world actually destroys one's ability to connect with the divine. So he's actually using these words to critique kind of so-called religious people. So what was complicated here is that we have a word, rea, that could actually mean two opposite things. It could either mean devotion in kind of a positive way, or it can mean hypocrisy. Or it can mean kind of hypocritical devotion, perhaps, right?
Right.
It's hard to know exactly how he wants to use these words. And then the other complicated thing here is that we weren't sure, okay, so why is he putting Zod or Rea together? If one means piety or devotion quite straightforwardly, and the other one is kind of complicated and can mean both, is he saying that they're the same thing and he's using a synonym, or is he saying that they're opposites? And that's why he's put them together in the line. So this was quite a complicated line, and I think we can safely say that no one is going to say, none of the four of us is going to say like this is the only way one can interpret it. But I think we feel pretty good about where we've settled. But I think it seemed to us, and I think it seems to me still, that he's kind of using both these words to critique so-called religious people, kind of how Hafiz was doing. We don't flaunt piety or indulge in hypocrisy. And he's kind of, I think, saying that one's condition is necessarily that of a sinner, because one is not truth with a capital T. And he's, I think, suggesting that that's fine, because haq, truth divine, which we've translated here just as divine, will ultimately be the one that's forgiving and is ultimately all that there is.
I know. I listened to what you've said, but I looked at it in a slightly different way, and said, it really doesn't matter what I am and who I am. I know, even if I'm a sinner, you are the forgiver. It's basically just acknowledging your own shortcomings. And it's that relationship, to me, that intensity of that relationship, because you can only say that to someone where you have a deep relationship with, that it really doesn't matter who I am, what I am. I know you will accept me. I know you will forgive me. That's that unconditional love that comes through for me in this couplet.
So Fatima kind of explained to us that if she were to translate this in kind of everyday language, kind of straying away a little bit from the literal, knowing what she knows of how Rumi deployed these words and how Hafiz deployed these words, she was kind of telling us that for Rumi, when he was talking about Zudaria, he was kind of saying, I've never said that I'm pious or devoted or a religious person. So there is a dimension of kind of irony with which these words are used. So we've tried to convey that irony. So I think Nand Lal is maybe saying something similar, right? Neither do we flaunt piety, nor do we indulge in hypocrisy. He's perhaps critiquing kind of so-called religious people, but also kind of saying that I've never said I'm a religious person, or I've never said that I'm pious in kind of a capital R religious way. So that's ultimately kind of how we decided to interpret this line. But as we've said before, right, this was a very, very complicated line. It took, weeks of Fatima thinking about it, going back to the Rumi and Hafiz and looking at various dictionaries for us to get there. Which I think is important for, again, the richness of the line and the richness of each word that Nand Lal uses. But that's kind of how we're getting to the translation we've settled on.
So we move to couplet number 4, which is really interesting, Daman. From where would we bring another? The world reverberates with echoes of oneness. Is this a rhetorical question? And, oneness, explain oneness. I mean, I want to hear that Farsi. It's what he's written in Farsi.
Yeah, this was another kind of complicated one for us to work through because we did move quite a bit from the literal translation when we settled on the world reverberates with echoes of oneness. So I think my interpretation of this line, of this couplet rather, is that so I do think that their first line seems rhetorical, from where would we bring another? And I think in the second line, he's trying to convey a sense of like, there's like a sense of like, the world is kind of closed, right? Like I'm imagining like a closed room, kind of like an echo chamber where you can't leave. And there's, just everything is bouncing off the walls and reverberating and echoing, right? And I think that, so in the original, if we were to do a line by line translation, shur means kind of noise or like chaos. In the world, alam is the original word. But kind of, so the line would perhaps be something about kind of the noise in the world is just kind of thrown around. And I'm curious to think through with you what he's saying here. But my interpretation currently is that he's kind of saying that there is no other, right? There's nothing but haq. There's nothing but capital T, truth divine, even if we might not recognize that. But that is the flow of the world in which we are in. And there is actually so I think he's trying to work, if there is no other, there is no other place from where to bring one's divine or one's capital T truth or beloved, because it is just the world. So that's the other complicated thing. It's alam here, which is world, universe, which often he'll use to refer to like the vastness beyond the temporal and celestial that his beloved encompasses. But here he is using the word world or alam, which is very much, the earthly realm or whatever. So I'm interested to hear what you think, because I do think this is a line that I'm like really intrigued by, but also I'm not quite sure about.
So talk about this word oneness. Let's focus on that first. What is it in Farsi? And give us the original and then break it down and how we chose oneness.
Yeah, it's the one, in the Persian.
So that's important.
Yeah.
Echoes of one, right? Ik, onkar. So, I mean, to me, it is that's what, in that coded way where you bring in something which is so dear to you. So from where would we bring another? I mean, he's already saying, because in the entire universe, it is the one that is vibrating, is the one that is echoing. There is no other. And that is very much that Sikh thought, the Sikh principle of ikunkar, the oneness, the ik, the numeral ik. That is it. So here for me, it was a very clear statement of what he's saying, because where would we bring another? If we are sinners, you're the divine, you're the forgiver, and everything around me is the one, is echoing with that oneness. So this to me was quite what was quite clear because of that ik. It's how, and then this is where the memories that you carry from where you come from, the perspective that changes. Maybe somebody else will not read so much about into that that ik, but for me it is very powerful. So Daman, we move to now the last couplet number 5, and nothing is ever uttered except truth divine by the lips of Goya, as the divine is the forgiver. Now, between you and I, Daman, if I was to try and transcreate these 2 lines, it would be something like this. Says Goya, my lips only voice your name, for you are the only forgiver. And here lies the challenge of the translation, what liberties one can take with this. But I am actually really partial to my translation. I have to be honest, because it speaks to me, because I can literally hear, I can literally feel Goya said, may my lips only voice your name. Mere, on my lips, twadai na rabe. May that name only stay on my lips. Because ultimately you are the forgiver. It's for that reason. And so that's why I am passionate to those lines of mine. But your thoughts?
Yeah. So this is kind of an interesting thing that I don't think we've discussed yet on the podcast. But Goya in Persian means utterer or one who speaks. And that was his pen name from when he first started writing poetry as a young child. And so there's, for every one of these last couplets where he's kind of using his pen name as one does in the Ghazal style, one could translate Goya as utterer, and that would change the interpretation of the last lines for each ghazal, because one wouldn't be thinking about Goya as the name, but it would actually be part of the structure of the line. So that is interesting here, because I think that he is playing with this knowledge, this kind of double meaning of his name, because we played a little bit in the conversations that we had with not actually saying Goya in the English, but actually translating the word. And it might have said something, right? Like the lips of the utterer or the speaker utters the name, or utters nothing but the name of truth divine, something like that, right? We would actually have the subject of the line be different. But here the subject of the line is non-existent, right? Nothing is ever uttered except truth divine. And I think that's what your translation is getting at, because we know that it is Goya speaking, and it is him. In some ways, it always feels like that these last lines are him talking to himself and reminding himself of something, or sending a message to himself in a very intimate way. So I think, so that's a decision we made, is to kind of have the first line in this last couplet be third person. In the Persian, and again, I guess this is another one of the challenges of translation, because if one were a Persian speaker, one would recognize that complexity immediately. So, how can we convey that in English, if at all? And this was kind of our way in which to try to get at that. What I think that is interesting, though, is that in the translation for the couplet 5 that the four of us settled on, we have truth divine. So in the original, he is using haq again, but we have truth divine, nothing is ever uttered except truth divine. And then we have by the lips of Goya, as the divine is the forgiver, which you've turned into your name and you.
Mm-hmm.
So that, I think, is another question, right? Like, what is the significance of the way in which we translate divine in the multitude of ways in which he talks about the divine?
Mm-hmm.
And is it always important to be as like specific and like loyal to the original, or is it sometimes actually more important to stray away a little bit from the original to convey some sort of meaning? I think is a question that we've asked ourselves, but is a question that I don't think there's like a right answer, but that's a question I'm interested in. And of course, the other interesting thing and the last thing I'll say is that we once again have divine as the forgiver here, right?
Mm-hmm.
And in the Persian, it's written exactly the same way as in the previous couplet in couplet 3. So we once again are seeing him working through the divine as being this figure that forgives.
Any thoughts on this ghazal as we're coming to the end of it, Daman, do you have? Because it is slightly different from the previous two which we have done.
I mean, I think this ghazal makes me think of kind of, it seems to flow, and I think in some ways it's hard not to think in this way, but also this is perhaps okay. But it seems to flow from kind of the thought he expresses in couplet 1, where the kind of powerful and famous line that there was no sign from the universe or no sign from sky nor earth, but love for you that brought me into bandagi, reverence bondage. Now, I probably messed up the exact words that we settled on for Ghazal 1, but that wonderful first couplet. But it seems to me that, and maybe this is just me like projecting my own things onto Bhai Nand Lal, but it does seem to me that each of the ghazals that come after Ghazal 1 tries to is kind of struggling with that idea, right? That is, it is just love. There's no sign from sky nor earth. There's no other. It is something that comes from within, because the guru or the divine is actually not distinct or separate from me. And it seems to me that this ghazal is kind of trying to work that out in some ways, because there is this sense that he is witnessing the truth divine, beholding the divine. There's a way in which I think this ghazal is really thinking about kind of what divine love is, which seems in some ways to be kind of unalienated love that's not separate from oneself, even as I think the experience of being in the world is to experience oneself as one's body and everything else as one's other. So I'm always kind of curious about that. Especially the line about kind of where would we bring another, the world reverberates with echoes of oneness. All he's able to utter is truth divine. In some ways, that there is really nothing else. Yeah.
That high state of love is where you see the one in everything, in everyone, and there is no other. What else can I say but you? Because wherever I see you. So that is that, that is that stage of when you are imbued in that love. You see that love everywhere. And this is, So that, I came across them, and a couple of nights ago, I was reading Puran Singh, and this is Professor Puran Singh, and I want to share something which I was reading about, and it mentioned Bhai Nand Lal. So I said, I've got to share this with you. So here we go. This is by Professor Puran Singh, and it's from the book Spirit of the Sikh, Part 1. The moth dies, seeing the light it loves. The woman is dead forever in the chosen beloved of her heart. Bhai Nand Lal, the poet and scholar, went to Anandpur to meet Guru Gobind Singh. One glance from the Guru was enough. The bee went deep and slept in the rare fragrance of the white lotus. Bhai Nand Lal never left the presence after. I mean, it's exquisite. It's beyond exquisite. But you know how neurotic I am about Puran Singh. So, but for me, this is just, the woman is dead forever in the chosen beloved of her heart, which is so true.
I'm kind of curious about that. How do you interpret this? The woman is, because in Gurbani we'll often see this idea, right? This has come up, I think. This is something that I've noticed somewhat recently, but there is sometimes this idea of like one who's dead while alive, right? Who is yeah. So I'm curious, what is your interpretation? And whenever I see that, I'm always like, what does this mean?
And and honestly, the feminist would scream with what I'm going to say, literally scream. So I don't know. But it is that love where there is the total surrender. You are no more. You literally are no more. And you are just immersed in that beloved, in that heart. So basically, you want to look like the beloved. You want to take on that color, the face, the attributes, and literally, it's that merges that you are no more. It is exactly the love which is Heat and Ranja. There's, there's that total oneness. There is no separation, and this is what in this couplet also, and this ghazal is also, there is no other. In that love, there is that total unity. When you actually merge, it is, you want the breath to be that breath. You want what you see to be what your lover, your beloved sees. You want to eat what your beloved eats. You actually become non-existent. And that's that death. In that death is that merger, that union, because in that dying, you have experienced vastness. Does that make sense? Is to experience the vastness, there needs to be that death. Because the beloved is so vast that you are entering that vastness.
That does make a lot of sense. And I think, yeah, whenever I see it in a shabad or whatever, I'm always kind of like, well, I don't understand that. But I think that does make sense. And I think it in the context of this passage that you've shared, right, 2 lines after the woman is dead forever in the chosen beloved of her heart, we have one glance from the Guru was enough. The bee went deep and slept in the rare fragrance of the white lotus. So there is something interesting, because first of all, it's one glance from the Guru was enough is a translation that he's actually taking from Bhai Nand Lal from, I want to say Ghazal 2. Yeah, the one life enriching, where I don't remember exactly what we've settled on at this point, but whatever, one bright life enriching glance was enough. So that is, I think, yeah, he's clearly immersed in Bhai Nand Lal. At the level of preferring to him kind of through this kind of unmediated translation, which I think is really wonderful. But it does seem to me that, yeah, I think this idea that it is just kind of a moment or a glance or just the kind of the character of one's longing for the guru does seem to be like like an endless union, right?
It's just
But
a
it's like
glance.
a glance, a glimpse,
Oh,
something quick, like just a taste.
oh, and it's enough. It changes your entire life. It is just a moment, a blink of an eye. It is a glance. It really is just that. And that's which I sometimes say meher, but it is not even meher because grace is all around. It is that
Mhm.
experience of that moment when you know something incredible has taken place and
Yeah.
you've experienced something which you cannot convey, but you know it is so profound that it has changed your life.
Yeah, and I think this is important because it is, again, right, not a sign from sky nor earth, but actually love for you. So I've been reading Bandagi Nama by Raghbir Singh
Mm-hmm.
in the English translation. And there's two things that he says um, towards the beginning that I've been thinking about kind of this week. The first is that he kind of is trying to work through the experience of reading Gurbani, and he says something like the supposed contradictions in Gurbani or something like that is the subtitle of the section. And he says, how do you make sense of the fact that like sometimes you'll get a shabad that says one thing and then sometimes you'll get a shabad that says something that seems to be its opposite.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, it's all of it is true, right? This idea of truth again, but not all of it is you're not going to understand everything at one moment.
Yes.
And his kind of approach was, he kind of says something like, when a shabad really resonated with me, I took that as a signal that this is what I need right now to help me on my journey, because this is what makes sense to me, or is having an impact on me in some way. And that I found really helpful because, again, this the dead while alive thing, right? I'll see it sometimes and be like, well, I have no idea what that means and I don't know what to do with this. And that can be like quite a jarring experience. So that was really helpful because he kind of was like, whatever is resonating is meant to resonate in that moment.
Right. I mean, when I work with transcreating the Shabads, sometimes, many times, not sometimes, many times, when I think I would like to work, I would like to understand the Shabad at a deeper level, and I begin working, and I'm saying, I don't have that capacity.
Yeah.
There are many that I have just let go
Yeah.
because I don't have that understanding right now. I don't feel it. I don't experience it. That thought is not there. And I fully well know that I'm it I am not ready for it. And so I leave it
Mm-hmm.
and say, may I have that capacity? May I come to this understanding so I can come back to this?
Mm-hmm.
And that's that growth that it may come in a blink of an eye, it may come through an experience, it may come through different things, and it may not come at
Mm-hmm.
all, and that's okay too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that's that that moment where you are comfortable with yourself, that feeling what you are talking about is, this is what I need right now in my journey, and I embrace it fully.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to struggle with something which I cannot understand, which is beyond me. Can I just understand this? Can I embrace this fully? Can it resonate within me?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe this will help me
Mm-hmm.
in the next one,
Mm-hmm.
in the next Shabbat that I'm struggling with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. Because I think sometimes
Yeah.
it becomes about, I mean, I think we live in a culture where we're expected to kind of be experts or master things, right?
Oh,
And it becomes very
yeah.
difficult. I mean, for me, it's been very difficult, especially as I'm, in academia or whatever, where one is expected always to know the answers,
Yeah.
which is just not the way the world works, I think. Um,
Yeah.
but the other thing that I was just reminded of from Bandagi Nama when you were reading the Puran Singh is he has a bit where he's talking about this experience of kind of frustration, this longing for some sort of being dead forever and the chosen beloved of one's heart, or however we want to describe it. But he says, when we're dead tired and broken and helpless, our thoughts revert to flashes of bliss experienced during the separated state of our mind. That there is always this idea that one glance truly is enough to sustain one, even if we're
Yes.
exhausted by living in the
Yep.
world.
I can vouch for that. Truly. It is that just one glass that changes your life and says, no matter what it is, I will walk because that was enough.
Yeah.
And I will do anything and everything for it to happen again. Or maybe it does, but that one was enough.
Mhm.
That one was enough. It would be blessed to be living in that ecstasy. I don't know what it would be like,
Mhm.
but that one is enough. So once again, Daman, this has been an interesting conversation. I know we began with Bhai Nand Lal.
Mhm.
We had Puran Singh, and then we had Rakbir Singh.
Yeah.
And that's what it is. It's a flow.
Yeah.
It actually is a flow. There is no difference. It is just a flow of that beautiful thought. And thank you once again.
Yeah.
And I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah.
Your thoughts before we close, Daman?
Yeah, I also am looking forward to continuing the conversation. And it's been also really wonderful to receive feedback from people who have been listening and joining us on this journey.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Oh, we thank you. Thank you, everyone that has sent us emails, personal messages via text or whatever else. We truly appreciate it. Daman and I were talking about that we actually just take these things for granted because we are so immersed in it. We just assume that everyone knows. And we're trying really hard to say, no, we are privileged with this knowledge because we are immersed in it. And we had this wonderful team of Nadhra and Fatima with us in this journey. And that is how we know what we know. And we are bringing that to you. So, if there is something in particular that you would like us to delve into a bit more, please don't hesitate to let us know. You can always email us at info@sikhri.org. We'll be more than happy to try and answer your questions. So, Daman, till next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
You are listening to SikhCast by Sikh Research Institute, illuminating every path.